Hello, friends. So I'm back with Pouria Montazeri. We are diving into the ocean of Maulana Rumi's words. We talked about longing a little bit, and it's such a vast and deep subject. It's something we could go on and on about. Well, first, salam, Pouria. How are you?
Salam, Tanya John. Good to be with you again.
So, in the last session, we were talking about longing, and we could go on and on about it because longing is something so innate to us. It's something that is just quite the undercurrent of our human existence. I want to talk a little bit more. I want to highlight a little bit more about the longing and what is it about union that can make us aware of the contraction later? What is it about being in union that is the only way we really understand separation, or we understand separation because we've been in union? And what is this pulsation that human beings are caught up in and that we live and we exist and we experience over here?
So what's great about this is that in Islam, it begins with the Quran, and it says that God expands and contracts, right? So when we look at this expansion and contraction, that if we were to really actually feel it as opposed to as an idea, we see that the universe expands and contracts. We see that the planet breathes, the sun breathes, the human being breathes. And in this breathing, in this pulsation, there is expansion and contraction, right? It's what's beautiful about Islam is that it honors creation, right? And it speaks to nature a lot because we are part of nature. And there are these laws in nature that are pervasive. And if we just pay attention to that, it's like a manual to understand how this life works. So we see this expansion and contraction, expansion and contraction. And if we were to bring union and separation and longing into this, we see that it's very natural that we go through these moments of clarity to these dark night of the soul and confusion, clarity, confusion, right? So as we said in a previous time we met, is Maulana says that you learn about something's truth by its opposite, right? So going through this journey of expansion and contraction that we cannot escape from, and it's brilliant, we get to go beyond the seemingly difference between union and separation. If we were to say that the nature of love is union, then whose nature is separation? And we can easily see that is this false identity, this constructed identity that I call person or character or personhood, the nafs, the ego, the smaller self, all the different names, right? And so we can, when we look at it closely, we can see that, of course, kind of separation. Why? Because it thinks that it exists alone. It's not connected. It has forgotten its source. Then of course it walks around feeling separated, actually manifests and begets separation, right? So this dance between the spirit and the nafs, the ruh and the nafs, this tension that the nafs goes through, like one of the beautiful stories at the beginning of Masnavi, is that one of the reasons that the nafs falls sick because it's pulled in two directions simultaneously, one towards the ruh, the spirit, and one towards the world and all the worldly things. And in between, it is sick. And that's why the Sufis call it the sickness of the heart often. And so staying here, if we were to even look at it more micro level, then we are okay. We okay the moments we become depressed, the moment sadness arises. If we look at these moments as the ebbs and flows and the contraction and expansion of our journey, then we normalize it. And when we normalize it, then we will look at them with curiosity as compasses to bring us home. Then this entire multi-billion-dollar infrastructure of making money on telling people to just be happy or telling people that there's something wrong with you, you have a disease that you need to get rid of, we bypass all of that. We save a lot of time and energy, and we welcome everything, because then I will tell myself that, Pouria, what you're going through is what this entire nature is going through. It's okay. then heed the call of that longing and make sense of what you're going through.
This is so profound what you're saying. It's so important and it's so profound because you're talking about what Maulana Rumi said, which is normalizing the fact that there is going to be yearning. There is going to be that feeling of being lost completely, the feeling of being separated. And then there are going to be moments of joy and exhilaration and celebration. And that this is the pulsation of life. And that we need to be okay with that so that we're not, being hard on ourselves and reaching for, unnecessarily psychotropic drugs and this, that, the other. In some cases, of course, they're needed, but in some cases where, for instance, you experience the death of a loved one, to reach for pills that make you happy when you may go through an extended period of grief, which is so perfectly legitimate because your heart is broken, because you've experienced loss, or for any other reason that your heart may break, there will be a certain period of time where there will be that aching and there will be that confusion. And that is just the natural, like you said, ebb and flow of life. That right there is like the key to freedom, to human existence, I feel like, to such an extent, just that knowledge. Because then you also know that if the darkness has arrived, if heartbrokenness has arrived, if that loss through separation has arrived, it's not here forever. Just like nothing is here forever. And that this too will change and that you will experience joy and find reasons to rejoice after.
This is why discernment and the presence of a guide and a teacher and friends of the heart or poetry and teachings like Rumi's come in support, because once we see that what the goal is and that everything we're experiencing is kind of bringing us home. Maulana says that every affliction, every pain that you go through is the beloved pulling you by the ear and bringing you to the abode. When we learn that, hopefully earlier than later, then we invite everything. And then we get to discern between what is really true here, what we really have experienced here, and what we hear out there. Because out there in the multi-billion-dollar infrastructure of religion and spirituality, even teachings like Buddha's teachings have been completely misunderstood, right? How many books with the title of happiness are out there that create this illusion that our sole purpose is to just be very happy, be untouched, without even addressing what brings true happiness. And in that, it is directly or indirectly teaching that suffering and pain and confusion are bad. They're not welcomed, right? And so we also have to discern and filter out how much of these ideas we've borrowed from the atmosphere we live in, and how much of it needs to be pruned away. And we need to really take refuge in what is really true for us. And what is really true for us, when we look at it with honesty and curiosity, we see that it's very natural. It's the way that this existence works. And then mourning and grieving and emotions and losses and everything will be welcomed. And by welcomed, we're not saying you're going to go celebrate and dance about it. No, it's welcomed. Welcomed only happens when there is a curiosity. Like welcoming as a verb is like, I am curious. I'm like, now this is alive. This is what's here. Let me look at it instead of distract myself with thousands of other things. This is the verb of welcoming, right? The curiosity to learn from everything and knowing that nothing is accidental. Nothing, we are not victims of things that keep happening to us. They might be happening for us.
That's a very good point. I really like that. I think this chase for happiness is really, it's inevitably toxic at the end, because you're constantly in this crazy loop where it seems like there's no end. Whereas to just accept that the human experience will cover the entire spectrum. In fact, some of the greatest music, some of the greatest art has come from heartbrokenness. Everything is memorable in civilization has come from that state of complete brokenness. So there is beauty in that too. And like you said, not something we are seeking. We don't go out there seeking that pain, but that when it comes, we don't shut the door to it. We accept that this is also part of the human journey. And this leads me to the point that you just raised, Pouria, which is about the teacher, the guide. Now, there is this persistent thought that, well, I don't need an intermediary between myself and my spiritual reality or the divine. And there's almost, in present time, in the modern age, an aversion to, well, I don't need a guide, I need to figure this out for myself, which are also valid and useful thoughts. However, a lot of time is wasted in just, fumbling in the dark alley of spirituality without a light, without a lamp. And I think one of the reasons why there is such a distaste in people for teachers is because of perhaps the whole guru phenomena. There's so many false prophets in the world. And this ties it up back to what you said in the previous video about discernment, having the discernment to know who is the right teacher, who speaks to your heart, not just to your intellect, but also to the intellect of your heart. So let's talk a little bit about why in Sufism a teacher or a guide is so important and is constantly reiterated and talked about, and why it's necessary.
It's interesting that when it comes to acquiring, let's say, our master's degree or our PhD or the many acronyms that we put after our name and all the certifications and all the degrees we seek, there is no question about having a teacher. There is no question of having an incredible professor. There's a lot of money and energy goes through people competing, and sometimes in a very negative way, to get into a particular university. So, or when it comes to buying that beautiful house or finding that most beautiful, physically looking partner, right? However right or wrong that may be, that's not the point. The point is, why is it when it comes to our own truth, why is it that when it comes to this extremely unknown metaphysical path, we're so sure that we can do it alone? That is just a curiosity I want to gift individuals that I would like to have a conversation with, right? So we need to be clear. We do this. I mean, there is no argument when it comes to material gain or material success or fame. But somehow when it comes to God and spirituality, we bargain. So that's one thing. The other is to inspire the human being to just pay attention so this existent can show that the entire existent out there exists in herself. One of the first things that this existent did beautifully, through prophets and saints and mystics and scientists and all of that, it showed it, revealed it in the form of a human being. And even in the Quran, God tells the Prophet Muhammad that, tell them that you too are a human like them. When we look at the West now, it's pretty simple. When we look at the post-World War II in America, the rigidity, the fear, and people kind of figuring out, especially the youth, that the formula wasn't working, kind of what we're going through right now in COVID. People are recognizing that the norm is just not working. So what happened, people became very vulnerable, and they were open to teachings from outside. But what happens is that that beautiful innocence wasn't accompanied by maturity and discernment. So it takes two. So when false prophets came and did whatever they did, they were able to do that because the field and the opportunity was there for them. And I'm speaking beyond victimhood. I'm not blaming anything. I'm just pointing out that this is the combination. And it's normalized in Islam and Sufism and Rumi's teachings that the world is always filled with false prophets. So what do? We have to build the art of discernment. So there is no blame. But one of the reasons that today people react to the whole guru phenomenon is because they're reacting to something that is flawed to begin with. And we can't really make an argument unless we put that thing that we hold on to as an argument under the microscope and really look at how it became to be. Because there are people without even experience have an aversion towards a teacher. But where does that aversion come from? You can't inherit and borrow aversion. Where does it come from if it's genuine, right? So when we look at it, then the first thing that happens is that I leave the stories out there and I look at me. I put history out there and what people have experienced or say out there, and I look at me. What is my experience? What is it that I need? And if I do need, if I'm longing for a teacher in a physical form, an unseen form, whatever it is, the form is not the importance. We give too much importance to the form, as if all the disciples and all the people that were around physically were close to the prophets got them to begin with. So physical proximity is not the way of Sufism, is a spiritual proximity. But if you do find that longing, all I would say is that don't take your eye away from it. Pray for it, ask for it, pray for it, and ask for it.
And be open to the fact that it will come in the most unexpected ways sometimes. Like the ways that you least expected. You may have an idea of who and what your teacher may look like, and it will be a completely different story. But staying open is another practice that we need to have.
The Rumi students, when they hear about Rumi and Shams meeting, which kind of reflects what you just said, none of them expected a thing. They were open, and it happened beautifully because that which made it happen was beyond the two. It had to happen, right? It was grace. So when people, I invite individuals, the participants that learn about Rumi, that don't be so fixated about Rumi and Shams's version of what grace had in mind. Be open to grace. And to be open is to get out of the way a little bit. And to get out of the way is to really practice, presence, practice remembrance, practice prayer and contemplation. Because the more you do that, the less of the noise that it is you is there. And there's more room for the sun to shine through.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And can it also be said that not just would your teacher come to you in an unexpected way, but when you practice that openness, everything becomes a teacher as well. Like there's that reality as well. Sometimes hear from so many people just taking a walk in nature. They could just sit there listening to the leaves or the trees or the birds or they could learn from a child. And so when we're in that state and we're welcoming, that guidance can come and does come in it, and our universe is full of it, full of the signs, the symbols, it just depends on how we are attuned. Again, it comes back to discernment as well and our own sense of openness, that anything can become a teacher as well.
You are held by this ocean. You're never alone. There is always a teacher for you. And there is a Persian expression that says, when you are awake and aware, the leaves on the trees speak to you. The brick on the wall speaks to you. When you're open and you're welcoming, and we talked about pain and everything, welcoming everything, then you welcome everything. And if you do find a teacher, you don't get so fixated on their form, because you will learn on the journey, once you find a teacher, that everything you feel and think about the teacher is a pure projection of who you really are. Because a true teacher becomes an incredible mirror that only shows you. So let's not waste so much time seeking it physically, because the mind is not the best way to find that which our heart really needs.
I love that. That's so great. Also, the teaching is to break the idols all the idols in your heart, these images that we set up. And yet, I guess the crazy paradox of being human is that break the idols, understand that that which you're seeking is formless and unseen to quite an extent. And yet you come programmed with this software that is only used, that is only used to, that can only look at the world and keeps craving form. So it's such an interesting paradox and a crazy challenge as well, right? You come programmed with what, because from the beginning of time, mankind created idols to worship, to bow before. And even now, whether you create, even if you believe in an unseen God, but we create idols of things we crave, of our children. We make these shrines in our hearts for people we bow towards. And the whole idea is to get out of that sense of duality and to break those idols and come into that place of being and knowing that the formless is the essence. What a quandary we are in.
What a privilege to even be in this quandary. What a privilege it is to be alive.
Never a dull moment. And on this beautiful note, I thank you so much for your time, as always, Pouria. This was enlightening and enchanting and just heart-nourishing. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to everyone who is watching this. Thank you for the time that you're spending to be with us.
Khuda Hafiz.
Khuda Hafiz.